Arthur's house had never felt so quiet before. The ticking of the grandfather clock echoed through the empty halls, amplifying the silence in a way that made him feel every second dragging on endlessly. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional rustle of a tree branch scraping against the window were the only sounds he could hear, but they only served to deepen the sense of isolation that had settled around him. The dining room table was set with care. He had spent hours earlier in the day preparing for the celebration. The silverware gleamed under the soft lights, and the cake, decorated with fresh strawberries and a smooth layer of whipped cream, sat in the center, untouched. The candles, though lit, had burned low, their flames flickering weakly as they fought to stay alive. Arthur had placed the small gift bags for each of his children at their assigned spots, a personal touch he knew they'd appreciate. But there was no laughter, no joy, no noise, nothing. It was a cold, empty night. He glanced at his phone again, hoping for a message, a text, or even a missed call. There was nothing. Just a blank screen that seemed to mock him. A part of him tried to tell himself it was still early, that maybe they were just running late, that they'd be here any moment. But deep down, another part of him knew something was terribly wrong. Arthur had always been the optimistic one, the one who tried to see the good in people, even when they let him down. But tonight, that optimism seemed to crumble in the face of an undeniable truth: his children had not shown up. His oldest daughter, Emily, had promised she'd be there. "Dad, we wouldn't miss it for the world," she had said just last week. She had even called to confirm the time, laughing when Arthur reminded her to wear something nice. Then there was Ben, his middle child, who had sent a cryptic text earlier in the day: "Sorry, Dad. Can't make it tonight. Let's catch up soon." That was it. No explanation. No offer to reschedule. And then there was his youngest, Sarah. The one who had always been the closest to him, the one who called every week to check in, the one who had been so excited about coming to celebrate his birthday that she had promised to bring her new fiancé along. They were going to make it special, she said. But here he was, sitting alone. The cake, once a symbol of a happy celebration, now seemed like a cruel reminder of what he had lost, the family he had spent his entire life raising, the children he had hoped would always be there for him, especially on a day like today. The table, once carefully arranged, now looked like a ghost of the warm, festive gathering he had imagined. The plates and glasses were untouched. The gifts lay abandoned. He had even bought a special bottle of wine, one he knew his son Ben would appreciate, but it remained unopened on the side, its presence only adding to the suffocating weight of disappointment in the room. Arthur's mind raced. What had happened? Why hadn't they shown up? He had spent so many years being there for them, sacrificing his time, his energy, even his own needs to make sure they were happy and successful. And yet, tonight, his birthday, of all days, he was left alone. He tried to call Emily first. No answer. Then Ben. No answer. Finally, Sarah. No answer. Each ring that went unanswered felt like a hammer pounding away at his heart. His stomach twisted in knots as he tried to push away the thoughts creeping into his mind. Was this some kind of joke? A cruel prank? He refused to believe it. Not on his birthday. Not after everything they had been through together. A sudden chill swept through the room, sending a shiver down his spine. It wasn't from the temperature. Arthur had made sure the heating was on high, the house warm and cozy. No, it was something else, something intangible. The room seemed to darken. The shadows from the corners of the room seemed to grow, stretching across the walls in a way that didn't feel natural. Arthur looked around uneasily. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, waiting for some sign. But there was nothing. The silence was deafening. Just as he was about to make another attempt to contact his children, the phone rang. Arthur jumped, his heart leaping into his throat as he fumbled to grab it. He glanced at the screen. The name on the caller ID made his blood run cold. Rick. Rick Simmons. An old friend from his youth. Someone he hadn't heard from in years. He stared at the name for a moment, wondering why Rick was calling. The last time they spoke had been shortly after Arthur's wife passed away. Rick had been there for him, offering support during those first painful months. But then, as life tends to do, time had moved on, and so had their friendship. Rick had disappeared from Arthur's life just as suddenly as he had entered it. The phone rang again, snapping Arthur out of his thoughts. He quickly answered it. Rick? Arthur's voice trembled, a mixture of relief and confusion. Arthur. I don't have much time, Rick's voice crackled through the phone. I need you to listen carefully. Arthur's pulse quickened. The urgency in Rick's voice was unlike anything he had heard from him before. Rick, what is it? Why are you calling me now? Something's happened. Something you need to know. It's about your children. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. What do you mean? What's going on with them? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Rick's voice lowered, barely a whisper. I can't explain everything over the phone, but trust me, you need to get to them. They're in danger. Arthur's mind raced. His children? In danger? The words didn't make sense. He opened his mouth to speak, but Rick continued, his voice sharp and urgent. I can't tell you any more right now. I just know that something's wrong. Get to them, Arthur. Don't wait. The line went dead. Arthur stared at the phone in disbelief. His hands shook, the device slipping from his grasp. He had expected something, perhaps a simple explanation, a reason for their absence. But this was something else entirely. Danger? What could Rick possibly mean? His heart pounded in his chest as he stood there, frozen. His children, the ones he loved more than anything, were in danger. But from what? And why hadn't anyone told him? The room around him seemed to close in. He could feel the weight of the silence, the emptiness pressing down on him. He had to act fast. He had to find them. But where? He didn't even know where to begin. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, breaking the stillness with a shrill chime. Arthur's head snapped up, his pulse racing. Who could it be now? Arthur hesitated at the door, his heart still racing from Rick's call. The seconds dragged on like hours. The chime of the doorbell rang again, louder this time, cutting through the silence like a knife. Who could it be? Why was someone at his door at this hour, especially after everything that had just happened? His mind was still reeling from the conversation with Rick. His children were in danger. But from what? And why hadn't they reached out to him directly? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more at play, something deeper than he could understand. Taking a deep breath, he walked to the door, his hands slightly shaking. He placed his palm on the cool handle, then twisted it open. To his surprise, standing on the other side wasn't a family member, a neighbor, or a friend, there was no one there at all. For a moment, Arthur stood there, staring at the empty porch. The only thing that greeted him was the wind, howling faintly across the lawn, the trees swaying ominously in the shadows. A chill ran down his spine. This couldn't be real. Was his mind playing tricks on him? But then, his eyes fell on something, a small, folded piece of paper placed carefully on the doormat. It looked innocuous enough, a simple sheet of white paper. But there was something about it that immediately felt wrong. Without thinking, he bent down and picked it up. His hands trembled as he unfolded it, his fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the paper. The message was brief but chilling. They know you're looking. It's too late to stop now. Follow the clues, but beware. Time is running out. The words hit him like a ton of bricks. His mind raced. What did this mean? Who wrote this? Was this connected to Rick's warning about his children being in danger? There were so many questions, but no answers. Not yet. His breath caught in his throat as he scanned the porch again, hoping to find some sign of who had left the note. But there was nothing, no footprints, no sounds. Just the stillness of the night. Arthur's fingers gripped the paper tightly as his mind began to churn. Follow the clues. Was this part of some game? Was it a trap? But who would want to play such a game with him? He couldn't ignore Rick's warning. If his children were in danger, he had to act quickly, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. He had to follow this strange, cryptic message. His first instinct was to call his children again. But then he remembered how they hadn't answered his calls earlier. They hadn't even shown up for his birthday. A heavy sigh escaped his lips as he ran his hand through his hair. The worry gnawed at him, but there was no time to waste. If something was happening, he couldn't wait for them to call back. The first thing Arthur did was look around the porch again, searching for any other clues. Was there something hidden in plain sight? But there was nothing else, no hidden messages or strange objects. Just the quiet, deserted night. He stepped back into the house and locked the door behind him, his mind still spinning. His thoughts bounced from one possibility to the next. Was this connected to something from the past? To a secret he didn't know about? Or was this some elaborate scheme to distract him, to confuse him? Arthur's eyes fell on the small kitchen table. There, tucked beneath a stack of unopened bills, was a letter he had almost forgotten about. The envelope was worn, the paper yellowed and slightly tattered, as if it had been sitting in that drawer for years. He grabbed the letter and tore open the seal. It was from an old lawyer, Mr. Stone, the family lawyer who had helped with Arthur's wife's estate after she passed. The letter was dated nearly 2 years ago, and it was addressed to both Arthur and his children. He hadn't read it when it arrived, too consumed with grief at the time to pay attention to much else. Now, as he skimmed through it, he realized it wasn't just a typical legal letter. It was a document about a trust, an inheritance, and a secret clause that could change everything. The contents of the will are to be kept secret until all beneficiaries are present. Should any beneficiary fail to attend, the stipulations of the will may be revoked, and the inheritance redistributed to other parties. Arthur's heart raced as he read the line again. Was this the reason his children hadn't shown up? Was there something in the will that they didn't want him to know about? The timing of it all felt too coincidental to ignore. Had someone been trying to keep him from uncovering the truth? The letter's contents were cryptic, but Arthur didn't need to be told twice. There was something far deeper going on here, something much more dangerous than a forgotten birthday or unreturned phone calls. Someone was hiding something from him, and the message on the paper had only confirmed his suspicions. It was all connected. Without wasting another second, Arthur decided he needed to act. His first task was clear: find his children and make sure they were okay. But how? The letter didn't offer much in the way of a solution, only more questions. He couldn't rely on his children to contact him, not when they hadn't answered his calls before. He needed to be more proactive. Arthur grabbed his coat, his keys, and the paper with the cryptic message, tucking it safely into his jacket pocket. He didn't know where to start, but he couldn't sit around waiting any longer. His children were out there, and if they were in danger, he had to find them, no matter what it took. He stepped outside into the cold night air, the wind cutting through his clothes as he made his way to his car. The headlights flickered to life as he slid into the driver's seat, but the familiar comfort of his vehicle did little to settle his nerves. His mind raced, and every creak of the car seemed louder than usual, as though something was following him. But he ignored the growing sense of dread and pulled out of the driveway. It didn't take long for Arthur to realize he had no real plan. He didn't know where to go, didn't know where to start looking. The message from Rick had been so vague, and the letter had only raised more questions than it answered. His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, but one thing was clear: he couldn't let his children out of his sight any longer. His first stop was Emily's apartment. She had always been the most independent of his children, living on her own ever since she graduated college. But Arthur knew the building she lived in well. It was only a few miles away, a short drive down the main road. As he approached, he saw the lights in the apartment building were dim. A few cars were parked outside, but none of them belonged to his daughter. His heart sank as he parked and stepped out of the car. The building's entrance was locked, but Arthur knew the code to get in. He punched in the numbers and made his way up the stairs to Emily's floor. When he reached her apartment, he knocked on the door, his fist pounding with urgency. No answer. His stomach twisted into knots as he knocked again, louder this time. Still, nothing. A wave of panic washed over him, but he pushed it down. She was always unpredictable, maybe she was out with friends. But the gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach told him something wasn't right. Just as he turned to leave, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There, under the door, was a small slip of paper. It was identical to the one he had found on his porch earlier. "They're closer than you think." Arthur's heart thudded loudly in his chest as his mind raced. Whoever was behind this was one step ahead. They were watching him, watching his every move. And now, the real game had begun. Arthur stared at the small slip of paper in his trembling hands, the words blurring together in his vision. "They're closer than you think." A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. Whoever had left this note, just like the one at his door, was watching him. But how? And why was his daughter's apartment involved? Was Emily being targeted? Or was it all a game, a twisted puzzle to unravel? He stood there in the hallway, frozen, heart hammering in his chest. The weight of the silence in the building felt suffocating, and the walls seemed to close in on him with each passing second. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. Closer than you think. What did that mean? Was Emily in immediate danger? And if so, who was behind it? Was this all connected to the strange events of the past few hours, the phone call from Rick, the cryptic messages, and the letter about the family's inheritance? Arthur's hands gripped the edges of the note, crumpling it slightly as a rush of frustration and fear flooded through him. The entire situation felt impossible. He had no answers, no one to help him, and yet he felt as though every step he took only led him deeper into a maze of unanswered questions. He quickly shoved the note into his jacket pocket and turned to leave. As he walked down the hallway toward the stairs, his mind turned over the facts. What did Rick mean when he said his children were in danger? Why hadn't they reached out to him directly? What was it that Rick couldn't say over the phone? And why had Arthur been left out of whatever was happening? His children had always been close to him, or so he thought. They were his flesh and blood. But now, everything felt like a lie. Their silence, the disappearance, the messages, it was all connected, and Arthur needed to figure out how. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the empty stairwell as he made his way back to his car. He was no closer to answers, but one thing was painfully clear: he could no longer afford to wait. He had to act, and he had to do it now. The drive. Arthur sat in the driver's seat, the engine humming softly as he stared at the road ahead, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror every few seconds, convinced that someone, or something, was following him. The eerie feeling of being watched didn't leave him. Every shadow on the roadside seemed like it might conceal a hidden observer. His heart continued to race, each beat quickening his panic. But he couldn't let that stop him. Not now. He had to find Emily. And then Ben. And Sarah, too. Wherever they were, whatever was happening, he needed to be there. His children were his responsibility, and he wasn't going to let them slip away without knowing the truth. Arthur's first destination was Ben's apartment. Ben had always been difficult to track down. he had a habit of slipping off the grid when things got complicated, always keeping his own counsel. But Arthur had a vague idea of where to look. The small town near the edge of the city. It was an area Ben used to frequent when he wanted to escape the chaos of family life. As he drove through the streets, the weight of the night settled on him. The messages, the strange occurrences. Each one felt like a piece of a puzzle he couldn't put together. He glanced down at his phone. Still no new messages from his children. A part of him wondered if they even knew what was going on. Could they be part of this mystery? Were they involved? Or were they also in the dark, just as clueless as he was? The familiar landmarks of the town began to appear as he turned onto the street where Ben's apartment complex was located. The lights in the area were dim, and the streets were quiet. It was as though the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The oppressive stillness of the night made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He parked his car in the lot, his mind churning with possibilities. Could Ben be hiding something from him? Had he gotten tangled up in whatever was happening? Arthur's heart beat faster as he walked up to the door of Ben's apartment, his breath misting in the cool air. He knocked twice, louder this time, hoping for a response. But there was no answer. No sounds from inside. Nothing. Arthur's stomach tightened as he tried the door. Locked. Just like Emily's. Was this another dead end? The search intensifies. Determined not to give up, Arthur went around to the back of the building. There was a small alley behind the apartments that led to a side door. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. He quickly made his way toward it, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds, feeling the presence of something lurking just out of sight. He reached the back door and tried the handle. It turned. Surprised, Arthur pushed it open cautiously. The dim hallway beyond was empty. The faint smell of old wood and dust hung in the air. It was almost too quiet. He crept inside, each step echoing in the narrow corridor. His hand tightened on the doorknob, the only sound in the building his own breathing. The door led into a small storage area, filled with forgotten boxes and the occasional discarded piece of furniture. Arthur scanned the room quickly, his pulse racing. And then, just as he was about to leave, something caught his eye, a piece of paper, tucked under a pile of cardboard boxes. His heart skipped a beat as he picked it up. It was another note. This one was different, though. It wasn't the usual simple message. This one was a map with an X marking a location he didn't recognize. The handwriting was rushed, jagged, almost frantic. It read, "Meet me at the old pier. Midnight. You don't have much time." Arthur's mind raced. The old pier? That place had been abandoned for years. No one had used it in decades. It was a dead zone, a place where old ships had once docked but were now rotting away, forgotten by time and people alike. It wasn't a place anyone would go unless they were desperate, or hiding something. Why would someone want to meet there? And who was leaving these messages? His mind returned to Rick's phone call, the words, "Too late to stop now," ringing in his ears. Was this the final piece of the puzzle? The old pier. Arthur didn't hesitate. He drove quickly, pushing the car to its limits as he headed for the pier. The clock on the dashboard read 11:45 p.m. The wind had picked up, howling against the car as he drove, the sky dark and ominous. The lights from the pier were barely visible in the distance, casting faint shadows against the sea. As he reached the pier, he noticed the dim outline of a figure standing at the edge. Was it a person? Or was it just his mind playing tricks on him? His eyes narrowed as he slowed the car and parked further down the road, staying out of sight. He stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at his skin, and walked toward the pier. The crunch of his boots on the gravel was the only sound, but it was enough to make him feel exposed. The figure didn't move. It stood at the edge of the pier, silhouetted against the moonlight, waiting. "Hello?" Arthur called, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. The figure didn't answer. It simply turned toward him, and Arthur's breath caught in his throat. For the first time that night, everything went still. A cold shiver ran down his spine as the figure finally spoke. "You've been looking for answers, Arthur," a voice said, low and distorted. "But what happens when the truth is too much to bear?" Arthur's pulse quickened as the figure remained still, an eerie silhouette against the darkened sea. The wind tugged at his coat, and the distant sound of crashing waves only intensified the oppressive silence between them. His breath caught in his throat. He had come this far, but the truth he was seeking felt both elusive and dangerous. He couldn't turn back now. His children's safety, his family's safety, was on the line. The figure shifted slightly, its outline becoming sharper in the moonlight. For a moment, Arthur thought he recognized something familiar about the shape, a silhouette he should know. But the feeling of déjà vu quickly passed as the figure spoke again. "You've been looking for answers, Arthur," the voice rasped, low and distorted. It was hard to tell whether it was a man or a woman speaking. "But what happens when the truth is too much to bear?" Arthur's mind raced, trying to place the voice. Too much to bear, the words rang in his mind like a warning, a cryptic echo that chilled him to the core. What truth? What was the figure talking about? He had been trying to make sense of the cryptic messages, the missing children, the inheritance letter. But the more he uncovered, the less he seemed to understand. Each piece of the puzzle only led to more questions. He stepped closer to the figure, his voice steady but tinged with a mix of confusion and urgency. "Who are you?" The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, it turned its back to him, staring out toward the ocean, as if considering the weight of his question. The wind howled around them, and for a moment, the world seemed to vanish into the mist of the night. Then, the figure spoke again. "You know me, Arthur. You just don't remember." The words struck like a bolt of lightning. "You know me." Arthur's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't place it. Who was this? Could it really be someone from his past, someone he had forgotten? The figure didn't seem like anyone he knew, but the words felt oddly familiar, like a long-buried memory trying to surface. "What do you want from me?" Arthur asked, his voice rising with both desperation and frustration. "What is all of this about?" The figure slowly turned to face him, its features now somewhat visible in the moonlight. Arthur's stomach dropped as he recognized the person before him. It was a face he hadn't seen in years, someone from his past, someone he had long since erased from his memory. "Catherine," Arthur whispered, his voice barely audible. He hadn't seen her in over 2 decades. She had been part of a past he had buried deep within himself, a chapter of his life he had tried to forget. But now, here she was, standing before him, just as if no time had passed at all. Catherine's lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was cold, calculated. "I see you remember. I was beginning to think you had forgotten all about me." Arthur took a step back, his mind spinning. Catherine. His ex-wife's sister, who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances years ago. No one had ever spoken of her again after she left. Arthur had never asked too many questions, too consumed by his own grief and the chaos of his life. But now, standing before him, she looked every bit as enigmatic and dangerous as she had been all those years ago. "What? What are you doing here?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling with a mix of shock and anger. "Why haven't you contacted me? Why haven't you told me what's going on?" "My children." Catherine cut him off with a harsh laugh. "Your children, Arthur, are the key. They always have been." Arthur's heart raced. The key? What did that mean? His mind was already teetering on the edge of understanding, but every answer seemed to raise even more questions. Was Catherine involved with what had been happening to his children? Were they in danger because of something she was doing? You don't understand yet, Catherine continued, her voice colder now. You don't understand what your family has been hiding. What you have been hiding. But that's about to change. Arthur felt a sharp pang of fear. What do you mean? What are you talking about? Catherine took a step toward him, her gaze piercing through him like a blade. I've waited a long time for this, Arthur. The truth is out there, and it's waiting for you to uncover it. But you're not ready. You haven't been ready. And now, it's too late. You can't escape it. Arthur's mind was a whirl of confusion and dread. The truth. Too late to escape. What was she saying? Was this all some elaborate revenge? Was she trying to tear apart his family for some reason he couldn't comprehend? I didn't ask for this, Arthur said, his voice cracking. I didn't want any of this. Just tell me what you want, and I'll give it to you. Catherine's eyes flashed with a strange intensity. It's not about what I want, Arthur. It's about what you need to know. You've been living in the dark for far too long. And now, everything is going to change. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. The cover was frayed and weathered, as if it had been carried for years. She held it out to Arthur, her fingers trembling slightly as she passed it to him. This is your answer, Catherine said. Everything you've been looking for is in here. But be warned, Arthur. The truth is never easy to bear. Once you open that book, there's no going back. Arthur took the notebook from her, feeling its weight in his hands. He hesitated, the foreboding words hanging heavy in the air. He had come this far, hadn't he? He had to know what was going on. He had to find the truth, no matter how difficult it was to accept. Why now, Catherine? Arthur asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why are you telling me this now? Catherine's expression softened just slightly, though there was still a coldness in her eyes. Because you've run out of time. Everything you've been running from, everything you've been hiding from, your family, your past, your choices, it's all coming to light now. The book will show you the way. It's up to you whether you want to face it or not. Without waiting for a response, Catherine turned and walked toward the edge of the pier, disappearing into the night mist. Her footsteps faded into the distance, leaving Arthur alone with the notebook in his hands. He stood there for a long time, the weight of the notebook heavy in his grasp. The wind howled around him, carrying the salty scent of the sea, but all he could hear was the pounding of his own heart. The truth was within his reach. But could he face it? Could he bear what was inside that notebook? The reckoning. Arthur returned to his car, the notebook still clutched tightly in his hands. The drive back home was a blur. His thoughts were clouded by what Catherine had said. The truth was waiting. But what truth? What was it that he had been hiding from all these years? Was this about the inheritance? Was it about his wife's death? Or was it something darker, something that had been buried deep within the family for years? He couldn't wait any longer. As soon as he reached his house, he locked the doors behind him, placed the notebook on the kitchen table, and stared at it for what seemed like hours. The weight of the decision ahead of him was crushing. Was he really ready to face whatever was inside? He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing against the worn cover. The surface was rough, aged by time and use. Taking a deep breath, he opened it. The first page was blank. Arthur frowned. The second page, too, was blank. His heart began to race. Was this some kind of trick? Had Catherine played him? But then, his eyes caught something on the third page, something scrawled hastily in red ink. Your family's secrets are buried where it all began. The house on Willow Lane. You have one last chance to stop what's coming. The words were like a punch to the gut. Willow Lane. The house where it all started. The house he had left behind when he married his late wife. It was the house he had always avoided returning to, the place where so much pain had originated. One last chance to stop what's coming. Arthur knew in that moment that there was no turning back. Whatever had been hidden all these years, whatever had caused the downfall of his family, was about to be uncovered. And there was no way to stop it now. Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of time. The words from the notebook had lingered in his mind ever since he'd read them. Your family's secrets are buried where it all began. The house on Willow Lane. Willow Lane. The name echoed in his mind like a distant, haunting melody. That house. His family's home, his first home. The place where everything had started, where his childhood had unfolded. The house where his life had changed forever. It had been years since Arthur had set foot there. He'd left the house long before his wife, Margaret, had passed away. The memories of that place were stained with grief, a feeling of loss that had weighed on him ever since he'd stepped out of those doors for the last time. The house on Willow Lane was where it all started, the good, the bad, and everything in between. And now, it seemed, the house was where it would end. The feeling of urgency gnawed at him as he paced around his living room, the notebook still resting on the table. The message was clear, he had to go to Willow Lane. He had no choice. But why had Catherine mentioned it? What did she mean by, one last chance to stop what's coming? Arthur didn't understand, but he knew he had to find out. He couldn't keep running away from the past. The past was chasing him now. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, determination settling into his bones. It wasn't just about his children anymore. It wasn't just about the cryptic messages or the inheritance. It was about his family, his legacy, and the truth that had been hidden for far too long. The drive to Willow Lane. The drive was long and quiet. As the engine hummed beneath him, Arthur's thoughts kept drifting back to the house on Willow Lane. He had tried to forget about it, tried to bury the memories of his childhood there. But it seemed that those memories had never really left him. Willow Lane was located on the outskirts of town, far from the city's hustle and bustle. The neighborhood had once been filled with life, children playing in the streets, neighbors gossiping over the fence, the smell of fresh-baked bread drifting through the air. But over the years, the neighborhood had faded. Many of the houses had been sold, abandoned, or left to decay. As Arthur drove deeper into the heart of the old neighborhood, the houses grew more distant, the streets emptier. It was like a ghost town, a place that time had forgotten. Finally, he turned onto Willow Lane. The road was overgrown with weeds, and the streetlights flickered weakly, casting an eerie glow over the pavement. The house was just ahead, looming in the distance, partially obscured by the thick trees that surrounded it. It looked as though no one had taken care of it for years. The paint on the walls had chipped away, the windows were covered with a thick layer of dust, and the front yard was overrun with wild grass. Arthur's heart raced in his chest as he parked in front of the house. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. He had never expected to return to this place. He never thought he would have to face the memories, especially not under these circumstances. But there was no turning back now. He stepped out of the car and made his way toward the front door, the crunch of his footsteps the only sound in the stillness of the night. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and forgotten years. The house seemed to watch him as he approached, its darkened windows like eyes staring into his soul. It felt wrong, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Arthur paused at the door, his hand resting on the doorknob. It felt cold, almost as if it were rejecting him. With a deep breath, he turned the knob and pushed the door open. Inside the house. The moment the door creaked open, a rush of memories flooded Arthur's mind. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The house felt abandoned, cold and empty, just like the memories he had tried to escape. He looked around, his eyes falling on the familiar surroundings, the old wooden staircase, the faded wallpaper, the once grand chandelier now covered in layers of dust. It was as if time had stopped in this place, the house frozen in a moment long past. Arthur took a few tentative steps inside, his mind racing. Why had he come here? What was it that Catherine had meant? And what was he supposed to find in this place? The air was thick with the scent of mildew and neglect. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet as he walked further into the house, his gaze flickering from one shadowed corner to the next. The silence was deafening, and the weight of his thoughts grew heavier with each step. He reached the living room, the place where he and Margaret had spent so many years together. The furniture was covered in white sheets, the same sheets that had been there the day they'd left. It was as though the house was frozen in time, waiting for something, or someone, to return. Arthur walked over to the fireplace, his fingers tracing the dusty mantle. The memories were overwhelming. He could almost hear the laughter of his children echoing through the house. He could almost feel Margaret's presence beside him. But then his eyes fell upon something, a small, faded photograph tucked between the cracks of the fireplace. He bent down and carefully picked it up, his fingers trembling as he turned it over. The photo was old, the edges yellowed with age. It was a picture of his family, Arthur, Margaret, and the children, taken years ago, back when everything had seemed perfect. But something was off. In the background of the photo, barely noticeable, was a shadowy figure standing just outside the frame. Arthur's heart skipped a beat. He had never noticed that figure before. Who was it? And why had it been left there, hidden in the background of the photo? The air grew colder, and Arthur suddenly felt a chill crawl up his spine. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the photograph, as if waiting for something to happen. And then, out of nowhere, a voice broke the silence. "You found it, didn't you?" Arthur spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. Standing in the doorway was none other than his daughter, Emily. The revelation. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. Emily? Here? He hadn't seen her in weeks. The last he'd heard, she was still in the city, trying to get her life together. What was she doing here? Emily, Arthur whispered, his voice shaking. What are you doing here? She stepped into the room, her face a mixture of fear and determination. I've been following the same trail you have, Dad, she said quietly. I've been trying to find out what happened to us. To all of us. Arthur's mind raced. Emily? She had been looking into this too. Had she known something he hadn't? And why hadn't she told him? Why had she gone off on her own? Emily, Arthur began, but she held up her hand, silencing him. It's okay, Dad, she said softly. I'm not mad. I needed to know the truth, just like you. Arthur's confusion deepened. What truth? What had Emily uncovered that was so important? I found something, Emily continued, her voice tense. Something about the house. Something about what happened here. Arthur felt a surge of panic. What was she talking about? What could possibly be here that would explain everything? Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. It looked old, even older than the house itself. She handed it to Arthur, her hands trembling. This, Emily whispered, was my mother's. It's all in here. The secrets, the lies, the things that were never meant to be found. Arthur's heart raced as he opened the journal. The first page was filled with his wife Margaret's handwriting, her words scrawled hastily across the page. They're coming for us. I don't know how much longer we have. The past is catching up with us. If anyone finds this, they need to know the truth. The truth about the house, about what we did. The words on the page sent a shockwave through Arthur's entire being. His hands shook as he continued reading. The secrets unravel. The journal was filled with cryptic notes, incomplete thoughts, and frantic scribbles. Margaret had known something. She had known what was happening, but it was clear that whatever she had discovered had been too much for her to handle. As Arthur flipped through the pages, he came across more revelations, more shocking truths that shattered everything he thought he knew about his family. Margaret had written about their financial troubles, their connections to some shady business deals, and even about Catherine, who had been involved in something darker than Arthur could have ever imagined. The journal also mentioned something else, something far more sinister: the Circle. Arthur felt his stomach drop as he read the words. The Circle. A secret organization that had been manipulating his family for years. They had been behind the deals, the lies, the disappearance of Catherine, and possibly even Margaret's death. It was all connected. The inheritance, the strange messages, the cryptic phone calls. And now, it seemed, the Circle had returned to finish what they had started. Arthur's hands trembled as he closed the journal, his mind reeling from the revelations it contained. The words of his late wife, Margaret, hung heavy in the air. The Circle. That phrase echoed in his mind, resonating with a chilling finality. What had it meant? And how was it connected to the events that had unfolded so far, the mysterious inheritance, the strange occurrences, and the disappearance of his wife's sister, Catherine? But it wasn't just the words that disturbed him. It was the realization that his family had been involved in something so much darker than he had ever imagined. The hidden dealings, the shadows lurking in the background, all seemed to be part of a much bigger conspiracy. He had been blind to it all, unable to see the truth, and now it seemed that the past was clawing its way back into the present, with dangerous consequences. Emily stood beside him, her face pale and grim. She had been silent for a long time, her eyes glued to the pages of the journal, trying to piece together the same puzzle. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I think we're in over our heads." Arthur nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. They were no longer just investigating his family's history or trying to understand the mysterious events surrounding the inheritance. They were now in the midst of something much bigger, a conspiracy that stretched across generations, with far-reaching implications. "We have to find out who the Circle is," Arthur said, his voice resolute. "They've been manipulating us for years, Emily. This isn't just about us anymore." Emily hesitated, her gaze flickering to the worn-out photograph of their family on the fireplace. The shadowy figure in the background, she had been wondering about that ever since Arthur had found it. She had her suspicions, but now, with everything they had learned, those suspicions were growing stronger. "It's more than just a group of people, isn't it?" she asked, her voice shaking. It's like they've been controlling everything from the start." Arthur's mind raced as he thought back to the strange occurrences, the mysterious messages, the phone calls, Catherine's sudden appearance. Everything seemed to point back to this elusive group. But who were they? And how were they connected to his family? "We need to dig deeper," Arthur said firmly, gripping the journal with newfound determination. "There must be more answers here." But before Emily could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Arthur froze, his heart racing as he instinctively reached for the handgun he had concealed in his coat. Emily followed his lead, her hand reaching for the kitchen knife she had taken from the drawer earlier. The footsteps grew louder, closer. "Who's there?" Arthur called, his voice steely with suspicion. There was no answer. Just the soft sound of breathing. The tension in the air was thick and suffocating, and for a moment, Arthur couldn't move, frozen by the weight of what was happening. Then, the figure emerged from the shadows. It was Catherine. Arthur's heart lurched in his chest as he took a step back, his mind struggling to process the sight in front of him. Catherine was standing in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. She looked different. Not just in the way she looked physically, her posture, her presence, it was as if she had changed into someone entirely new. What are you doing here?" Arthur demanded, his voice tight with disbelief. "We thought you were gone." Catherine didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped into the room, her gaze shifting to the journal in Arthur's hands. Her eyes narrowed when she saw the pages of her sister's handwriting. "Margaret's journal," Catherine murmured, her voice heavy with emotion. "I should have known." "Catherine, what's going on?" Emily's voice trembled with a mixture of fear and frustration. "Why didn't you tell us everything? What is the circle? And what do they want from us?" Catherine swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she reached out and snatched the journal from Arthur's hands. She flipped through the pages quickly, scanning the text before closing it with a decisive snap. "I was hoping you wouldn't find this," she whispered, her eyes darkening. "I never wanted you to get involved. But now it's too late." Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean, too late?" Catherine's expression hardened, her face taking on a resolute, almost grim expression. "The circle isn't just a group. It's a legacy. A force that's been controlling your family for generations, Arthur. They were behind your wealth, your rise to prominence, and they're behind the fall too. Everything you've worked for, everything you've built, it's all been because of them." The words hit Arthur like a slap. A legacy? His wealth? His family's success? All orchestrated by a secret group pulling the strings behind the scenes? He couldn't believe it. "No. No, that's not possible," Arthur stammered, his voice betraying his disbelief. "We worked hard for everything we have. I didn't owe anyone anything. My success was mine." Catherine's eyes softened, but there was no warmth in them. Only cold, bitter truth. "You've been living in a fantasy, Arthur. They controlled everything. Your business, your family's rise to power. It was all part of their plan. And now," she paused, her gaze flickering to the windows. "Now, they've come for what's theirs." Arthur's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, theirs? They want everything we have?" "No, Arthur," Catherine said quietly, her voice edged with a pain he had never heard before. "They've come for you. The past comes to light." The words hung in the air like a dense fog, suffocating every thought, every question Arthur had. "They've come for you." The ominous statement carried so much weight, it felt as though it was pushing him into a corner. He wanted to shout, to argue, to demand answers. But there was a cold, terrifying certainty in Catherine's voice that made him hesitate. "What do you mean, they've come for me?" Arthur asked, his voice a mere whisper. He could barely form the question, the dread spreading through him like a slow poison. Catherine took a step forward, her eyes locked onto his. "Arthur, you don't understand. You're not just a bystander in this story. You're the key. Everything that's happened, everything that's been leading up to this moment, it's all been because of you. The circle's been grooming you, watching you for years. You are their final piece." Arthur staggered back, his mind whirling. "Grooming me? The final piece? I don't understand," he murmured, his voice breaking. "I've done nothing wrong. I've tried to build a good life for my children." Catherine's face softened just a little, and she reached out as if to comfort him. But there was no warmth in her touch. "Arthur, it was never about what you've done. It's about who you are. Who your family is." And now, she trailed off, her gaze flickering to the hallway, as if sensing something or someone approaching. "Now, what?" Emily asked, her voice trembling with anticipation. "Now," Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible, "they're coming for you. And they'll stop at nothing to make sure you take your place with them. The circle's return." The house seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening with each passing second. Arthur could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, and for the first time in his life, he felt completely out of control. His family was caught in the crossfire of something far bigger than they could ever comprehend. The door slammed open with a violent force. Arthur spun around, his heart leaping in his chest. A group of men and women entered, their faces hidden behind masks, sharp, angular features that made them look like something out of a nightmare. They moved with the eerie precision of people who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Their eyes were cold, their intentions clear. Arthur's blood ran cold. The circle. Catherine stepped in front of him instinctively, her hand held up as if to shield him, but the masked figures didn't hesitate. They advanced, their eyes locked on Arthur with an intensity that felt almost predatory. "This is it, Arthur," Catherine said, her voice quiet but firm. "They're here for you. The circle has come to take you. To finish what was started all those years ago."